Hayley here has joined us. You're a branding designer, right, for Pepsi and Co. among many other things. I know you're well traveled and you've done a lot of creative design through your travels. So, do you want to just give us a brief intro of you and your career journey before we start fielding some of these questions?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, guys. Love to see that there's already questions in the chat. Very excited for this talk. And I guess a little background of my journey in design. I went to FIT in New York City. Um, I honestly picked the school because I wanted to be a fashion designer, but I applied for the communication design program. So I did my associates in communication design. And then after you finish those 2 years with the associate's degree, you are able to pick a focus area. So out of advertising, graphics, packaging, and illustration, I went into packaging design specifically, which is a very niche little program. And that was part of the reason I picked it. Also, because I loved the idea of more strategic thinking around design. So my journey all really started there. And I'd say my first couple of years out of school, I went into the agency world in New York City. I was very much more focused on pack at that time, but over the past 12 years that I've been working in design, I think it's really shifted. So it's gone from being on the pack to literally everything off the pack, which I'll get into more of later. But I've currently been at PepsiCo now for 8 years, and I've moved twice within that role. Well, five different roles actually over those 8 years, but kind of moved from New York City to Dublin for our global headquarters. And then I now sit in London in our European team that mines all of the European and UK markets.
Amazing. Fantastic. And so my first question for you to kind of get the ball rolling, which I'm actually already seeing is a question from another person. Tell us more about Pepsi. How does it work, department wise? The question we got actually in the chat was, how does your department work with the marketing department? Do you work closely together? Do you want to just give us a quick insight to that?
Yes, totally. So PepsiCo, I must say, I am pretty proud of what we do in design and innovation for PepsiCo because it's quite unique for a big corporation. Basically, about 13 years ago, Indra, the former CEO, came to Mauro Porcini, who's our chief executive creative officer, and asked him to basically start this function. And it started out as 5 people. They always tell this really ridiculous story of being in this tiny little closet office in New York City. But their ambition was not just to create sort of like an agency for the company, but actually to have a seat at the table. So I mean, to that question of do we work closely with marketing teams, I would say that from the beginning, the ambition was really to be totally integrated into the cross-functional business. So not only do we speak with marketing on a regular day-to-day, hourly basis, but we are very connected with R&D, insights, the comms teams. So we are fully integrated as a design function, as opposed to, again, feeling more like a resource that is just used as and when. So very much feels like a business role a lot of the time, but in a very good way.
Yeah, so, break that down because there's also a question we got, but like break that down. What does a typical day in your life look like? Like if someone were to shadow you for a day, what are some of the tasks that you would be doing or, you know?
So I guess I might break that into the 3 phases that I've had in my career. As I said, I've had 5 roles at PepsiCo. So I started out as a senior designer. As I mentioned, I was an agency side before, so I didn't start out senior, but by the time I came to PepsiCo, was sort of on that end of had a good bit of experience in design, but was very much leading the creative side. So I owned a brand, one of the tea brands in the US, Pure Leaf, if you're familiar. And so my responsibilities were kind of across anything and everything that was a visual touch point for Pure Leaf brand. So that would be the packaging. So we still did a fair bit of packaging in that role because we were launching a lot of new teas. So like a new organics line, for example. I would work closely with the marketing and on that product in particular, the R&D team, and actually taste the teas, like figure out what the structure it should live in would be, figuring out the printability of how the labels would sit on that bottle. But then in that role, I really started to expand off pack and work across social and digital was a big one because the brand had horrendous social media before. And so that was a big personal task that I really wanted to learn about that space, but also plan for the brand how to kind of take it from not having a social presence to having a really strong one.
Mhm.
So I did a lot of production, a lot of photo shoots for the brand, which was a passion point of mine, but working in lifestyle photo shoots, more life, kind of like still life photography kind of things, like shooting the teas and glassware. But that role was very hands-on design. So I would be on the tools on a day-to-day basis, Illustrator, Photoshop, InDesign, building out brand toolkits, but then doing all those bits in between. And
Mhm.
then, as I transitioned to Dublin, my role was, it came with a promotion, and I kind of went a little bit more into the managerial role side of things. But in Dublin, my role is very much to start the new global team there. And with that was a lot of culture building, a lot of onboarding other people, and kind of being a design lead in the sense of bringing on new creatives and kind of teaching them the ways of PepsiCo. But I also had this challenge of designing the new office. So that was a big learning curve as well. But my role kind of went from just doing all those graphics and, very pack related kind of tasks to then designing offices, designing teams, speaking to loads of people in the business. And that's when I also shifted into owning brand Pepsi, which is a
Mhm.
very different brand to be a part of.
Mhm.
So again, it kind of felt like it was a much higher level, like strategic role. Um, and then now in my current role in London, again, have kind of moved up and I'm a senior design manager managing about 8 to 10 creatives on a day-to-day basis. So my
Mhm.
day is very call oriented, which some people might cringe at the idea of that. I actually love talking. So it works for me, but I feel like my day is very much touching base with the design team in the morning, kind of talking through like what help people might need throughout the day, creative reviews, etc. But then between all of that, I have calls with the business, calls with various agency partners that we might bring on for like advertising campaigns. It's a lot of calls, but
Wow.
I almost feel like I like to call it almost like a political role, because my job is to protect the creative output that we want to achieve. And so I will go into calls and just fight for our vision, fight for budget to fund that vision, kind of push our marketing teams to do things differently. And that's kind of a lot of what I do is like, we've got this idea, but like to achieve that, what does that take? And so again, it's a lot of figuring out the business and just chatting to loads of people. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Amazing. So it sounds like, you wear many hats and that as you grow in your career, the hats that you wear might change. So if you could, I'm going to group some questions in one in this. What are some of the skills you feel like young designers or people who want to go into the design industry should start off with? And what programs beyond the Adobe suite might they want to learn and build? Would you mind touching on that a little bit?
Totally. I do think that the landscape has changed so much from the time that I was a junior to the time that I'm now onboarding my junior designers.
Mhm.
So I've actually had a girl in our team. She was my first official hire that I kind of picked out of a creative review, brought into the business, and I've been training her, day in and day out. And I think the things that she's starting to really lean into are so different from what I did back 12 years ago. So some areas of focus for her were are really around honing her executional skills, but very specifically in the 3D digital animation kind of spaces, because those are actually skills that are really hard to come by, especially in traditional branding design. And the fact that she's now kind of crafting those skills, literally every team wants a piece of her and are like, can we get a week of Kira's time to support on X? So
Mhm.
I think that having skills in After Effects or Blender, gosh, she's started learning another program that's another 3D one. She finds that like it's not just one program, but it's many. She'll kind of use multiple different ways to create 3D visions. Again, a lot of motion pieces for us. And I think that that's where the future skill set is kind of lying of what
Right.
brands are really looking for. But with that, I will just kind of add to it is probably the biggest overarching thing I would look for in a junior creative is curiosity and kind of the bigger picture thinking. And I think her portfolio and the reason I had selected her a year ago was that she actually had linked a lot of her student work to insights. So she had something, I remember she had this stat around 63% of McDonald's consumers like use this as like a date night kind of meal. But then she linked her whole project to that insight. And I thought that that was such strong thinking that we really look for as a bigger company to, link everything back to reasoning and strategy. So that's something I definitely look for, at least in our business.
What do you say? Because you have done both agency and corporate, and I'm going to have you talk about that a little bit later in this, because we do have a lot of people who are looking at both, right? They're looking to go into both. When you're talking about the base of skills, right? So things like, let's say, typography, etc., would you recommend people get that base first and really get strong in their design and then add animation? Like, what advice would if people were building their portfolio, what would be maybe the type of pieces that you would want to see in it
Mm.
beyond just connecting insights? Because I think that that's a really great
Mhm.
thing that you mentioned, but I'm also curious that, like, on the portfolio side, what does that look like for you?
Totally. So, again, I guess I'm now using her as an example because I think it's a good person to make an example of because she's just performed really well in this role. But in her book, she didn't necessarily have animation in there yet. But
Mhm.
in this portfolio review, she literally had it was a Heineken campaign that a lot of students in the UK had this past year. I think there was a big competition around Heineken, and so loads of different students from different schools had done it, but hers was the only one. She had a physical chair that she had built kind of based off the campaign, and it was hand painted and had like Heineken beer holders built into it. And I was like, if this girl can make a 3D chair and paint it with the branding, that just shows that she's A, curious, and
Right,
B, willing to go above and beyond and think about the work outside of just the graphic execution of the poster.
right.
And that was the main thing that really was that like pivotal point where I was like, that's the kind of person we're looking for. And I think it also shows that while she may not have had the animation or 3D skills at that time, it just showed that she had the ambition to learn a skill that is not maybe traditional or what you
Mhm.
might learn in school.
Well, I think that's also, I mean, we had a call the other day where you mentioned that the world is changing. Like, one of your jobs you were saying was to think about what is design going to look like in 10 years. And you yourself, you are now doing Pepsi and Co. merchandise, right? So you have to blend those. Explain a little bit more about that side of it, because I think they would find that really interesting in what you do as the merchandising side.
Totally. So, I mean, this has been my passion point. I'll try not to talk too much because I get really excited about it. But basically, about a year and a half ago, as you guys probably know or might not know, but Pepsi did redesign that launched last year in the States and then this year in the rest of the world. But with that redesign, the everyone across the globe pretty much working on Pepsi was like, we need to do more cool stuff, like not just our basics. And one brief that came to me from our big boss was, let's do something in merch that just kind of takes it up a notch. And in the past, we maybe would have t-shirts or tote bags that would go out at events, but nothing was really done with a level of detail or kind of design consideration at that point in time. And with that, our team really took it and ran with it. And when I say we got obsessed, we got like very obsessed. We started going to trade shows in the UK, so kind of learning from different suppliers and vendors about their capabilities, like what you can do in that world of merchandise. We started learning a lot about sustainability, and that became a passion point. Like, if we're going to make stuff, let's try and make good stuff and things that
Right.
people actually want. And so it got to a level of obsession where basically now, actually, our first collection for the launch of Pepsi um, was so successful and the markets loved it so much that now they've been ordering it around other global offices. They're selling it in New York. And it's kind of set a new standard of like, okay, this is like a new, more premium offering that we can actually do as a brand. So now I've gone into owning merchandise for all of our brands in Europe, which is a big undertaking and it's a lot of new learning. But I think, again, as traditionally as like a pack designer, who wanted to be a fashion designer. It's just such an interesting space to kind of, I guess, have that opportunity to almost feel like a student again and be learning something new and challenging ourselves. And yeah, this Monday I was up at factories in the UK, again, just learning. And I think that's just nice that even 12 years into my career, I'm still kind of picking up new skills and pushing myself, because otherwise it might frankly be a little bit, I don't know, redundant to do
Yeah.
this thing all the time.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, and I hope everyone else is hearing this, just because you're a graphic designer does not mean you can't have other interests and passion projects. I think one thing, if I can encourage all of you, is like being a creative, we all have many hands and many cookie jars, and that's something that you can and should foster as you're building and having personal projects also in your portfolio to demonstrate that. I wanted to quickly, because I know we have some people who are more ad side. What is the difference between ad design or like when you were working in an ad agency in terms of maybe how it's set up and your roles in it and working in a corporate, and then how did you bridge that between like a junior designer at an ad agency and a senior designer at Pepsi and Coke? I know that right there was a combination of a few questions from some of our persons.
Sure. So I will say agency side, I worked in pretty specifically like branding agency,
Mona, shut
but
up.
I
Guys, if you are not muted, sorry, please mute yourself. I'm trying to keep a view of who isn't, but if you are not muted, please mute yourself. Thank you.
Mhm. um right. So advertising side of things, I did do a stint in gosh, now I'm just blanking on FCB. I don't know if you guys have heard of FCB, ad agency. It's very much in the pharma space, so very different from a lot of the roles that I've done. But I did find in that experience, it was very much almost a different type of problem solving, where you would get like an ambition from a more medical brand or a new drug going out on the market, and it was very kind of editorial or layout based, and it was kind of cracking like a cool way to reinterpret whatever messaging they wanted to communicate and making it look good. So it was always a challenge in that kind of way, but I will say it was a lot more kind of structured in being maybe more traditional graphic design as an
Right,
output. Um, I don't know if it's helpful to compare that to then the branding agency side, but I will say in that sort of set of experience when I was a junior, um, it was very pack focused, but we did always try and push the briefs to include other touch points, like what would this look like going from the pack to then the an activation around it, and almost push like more campaignable ideas. To say, like, don't just redesign the pack, but think about, an activation where you would have a whole pop-up thing happen at this time in the year, and this is what the outfits of the people working at that event would wear, and we would kind of blow it out in that way and still try and think about it in a more 360 way. Um,
mm,
but I guess in contrast to then working in PepsiCo, within an organization, I think the biggest difference is that agency side was always about taking on new briefs and really, really creatively solving them and trying to deliver best in class concepts, new ways of thinking about these briefs. But it was very kind of touch and go. You would get a brief, you would do the best you could, and it would get presented to the client. Sometimes you would continue on it, and sometimes it would like disappear, and you're like, what happened to that project? Where did it go? And I think it gave a lot of visibility to a lot of different brands. But then the contrast is working in PepsiCo. I've very much been on, two brands really. Pepsi for almost 6 years at this point. And it's so different in that you are only on one brand, but you know every single thing that's happening to that brand. So literally
right,
the percentage of sales and how it's increased or dropped within a given month in a market, and how you might need to solve something in design to fix that. Um, so it's a lot more full visibility of like the business side of the brand, and
right,
you do know when a project disappears why it disappears, because you've got that kind
right,
of line of sight. So very different roles, and neither is better than the other. I think,
right,
agency or ad side, sometimes you're honing more of your executional skills. And I think PepsiCo side, for me at least, or big business, is a lot more business skills, learning the marketing lingo, I find myself sometimes literally looking at business courses to be like, how do I understand KPIs better and present that back to the business and speak their language? I don't know, but I'll figure it out. Um,
Mm.
so definitely different kinds of roles.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions was to kind of piggyback off that, and then we'll switch gears a little bit. You know, with playing such a big role in the mainstream company, how do you deal with that pressure to keep up with how things are changing in the market? Like, is there like how do you scan that? Is there advice that you can give for people to have an understanding of this? Do you use social media for that? Like, give us an insight.
Mm. I mean, it's very rapid. I will say it is not for the timid to work in a business that moves at a fast pace, especially on a brand that literally a tiny, tiny change could impact billions in sales. So it is high pressure in that regard, but I think it's just being really adaptable is probably the biggest thing. And I sometimes joke with other members of the team or other people in the business. I'm like, guys, remember at the end of the day, it is only a soda and everything's gonna be okay. And like, take a breath. It's, not the end of the world, but like, we do have to kind of take problems on each day that we'll try and figure out solutions for. But it's a lot of creative thinking in that way. Like, and I think it was a lot harder at the start. Now 8 years in, I think more and more you learn the business, that pattern that might happen. So actually, I find it quite fun at this point. Um, I wrote this down in a recent kind of presentation I did to leadership when pitching to have this new role to lead merchandise. But um, I put that one of my favorite things about my role in PepsiCo is the art of diplomacy. So the art of politely telling people how to, you know, change what they want to be doing. And I think that that is a big part of the role as well, is just how you talk to the business. And um, you're always trying to reframe everything you're doing. You're like, what's the most strategic, smartest way to present this so that people want to do it?
Right.
So yeah.
And with that, I think let's take a pause from the questions. We are going to come back to the questions. I saw a lot about being abroad and working abroad, and we have a lot that we can talk about that. I do want to take a quick second though and explain a little bit more about Artbound and who we are and what we do, because I think that will also help in those next questions too. So we at Artbound, guys, we are a career accelerator for creatives. So our whole premise is to help the current generation of students and recent grads launch their careers in major creative hubs like New York, Chicago, London, which you're in now, Berlin, Melbourne, Sydney, and even remote internships. So even if you can't maybe go anywhere, but you still want to get these big cities, these great opportunities on your resume, you can. And our program, we have a few key industries we place in. You can see the full list on our website, but to break it down, we have, entertainment and media, so pre-production, production, post, music, fine arts. We have design, what we're talking about today, graphic, motion, UI, UX, branding. We have marketing, advertising, communications, and we have fashion. And so those are the five key industries we place in. Definitely check our placement lists on that to see more on our website about what we offer. We have a wide range of partner companies like advertising agencies, creative agencies, production companies, production studios, galleries, art spaces, residency spaces, art fairs, magazines, and so many more. And we have a nice range of like boutique, mid-sized companies, large companies, and so forth. So there's really something for everyone who is looking to be a creative and go into these creative sectors. We guarantee an internship upon acceptance into our program. And one of the key ways that we do that is through actually going through an ArtBound Initiative Academy where we really level you up in your skills. We also will bring you into our network of over 1,000 alum internationally. We've had participants from every major time zone and every continent but Antarctica, and we give dedicated and continued support through our whole process. And so in our academy, we split this into two modules. The first is profile revamp and travel preparation, interview preparation, resume revamp, portfolio revamp. And this is done by senior recruiters, industry experts, and resume writers. During module two, we're really going over internship and career readiness, helping you bridge that gap through the technical skills that you're learning at university and the soft skills and unwritten rules that you need to know to launch your career. So module 2 is all about leveling you up and helping you see what it's really like in terms of we have case studies and testimonials, and we really go over everything from like how not to piss off your boss but still get all the information you need, to how to understand the skills that you have and how to use that to level up and launch your career. And so we really aim for us to be a launching pad. And you do get a certificate of completion in our program in Career Essentials and professional development. Our coaching happens completely online, so you can do it anywhere and you can do it like while in school. It's really easy to follow. And we give you 2 resume boosters, the certificate from us and the internship directly with a company. Our industry experts include, but are not limited to, from Warner Bros, Paramount, Omnicom, Amelie, McCann, Shutterstock, Vice. We have people from Ralph Lauren. We have Tony Award winners for theater. So all of our experts are know their stuff. They're in it. They're seeing how these industries are changing and can give you the advice accordingly. And like I said earlier, you're guaranteed an internship. So we have internships ranging from 3 to 6 months. They can be part-time, full-time, for academic credit. We really want to make sure this program fits into you and your next steps. And about 60% of our alum, including myself, as I'm an alumna of the program and now the head of admissions, have gotten hired post-internship. So we're quite proud of that. I think that's a large part into our coaching. We have over 300 partner companies worldwide, and we give dedicated support through a team of coordinators who are going to help you through each part of the program. In-city coordinators who are creative industry experts themselves, like they're all in the creative sector. They know what it's like to be a creative intern, so they can answer any question from where's the best coffee shop to how do I jump on this project and bring it up with my boss. And you would also be joining our creative community. We have monthly online and offline events. We have access to exclusive job boards that we post monthly, plus pop-up positions as we hear about them. We have workshops and industry talks, career tips, topics of information you can follow, forums, and you get lifelong access to our network, both the in-person and online opportunities in all of our cities. So that was our program. Some highlights as well. And again, we're going back to the questions. You can also, if you have any questions about the program, you can add them in as well. But just some highlights of our alum. Our alum have gone on to work at some really impressive companies post their internship, have gotten scouted straight from their internship for most of these. And we are taking applications for the summer. Our deadline is going to be December 10th. So it's in the next 3 weeks. So it gives you something to do over Thanksgiving break if you have nothing to do, if you're US based. And if you, for more information about our tuition of our program and our scholarships, please go to our website. I'm going to link it in the chat for you all. And yeah, I would say next steps would be to see if you're eligible. We're going to be doing a dedicated information session on November 21st. So if you are free and you want to see more about what our program does as a program, then you can pop on there. I'm going to add all of these links in the chat. Okay, so I want to go back to the Q&A and really go over, you've worked internationally. What did that look like for you? How did you make those transitions? And how's that affected your design?
Yeah, great question. I will say across both of my international moves, I think they've been very different.
Okay.
First, obviously, going from New York to Dublin was probably the biggest initial shock, especially because I'd never been to Ireland before deciding to sign the contract, which was a bit crazy. Um, I did know I always wanted to live in Europe, so that was kind of a plus, which is part of the reason I took well, I think I was gonna take it anyway. It was an opportunity. I was like, "That does not happen, much in life, to have a chance like that." So, again, I think my initial shock of moving to Ireland was pretty big. It's very different from New York City, obviously, as you can imagine. Um, I also had my head down on work and just trying to adjust to the role. I was also the only designer in Ireland for about 6 months, so I was literally kind of on my own in the department trying to figure that
Yeah.
out. So, a lot of pressure in that way. There was maybe about 3 months that I felt really kind of, I won't lie, a little depressed and like, "What am
Yeah.
I doing here?" Um and tend to fill the gaps with work. So I was just working as much as I could. But once I made one friend in Ireland, it felt like I met the entire city, and that was quite nice. I think Ireland's unique in that it's actually very small, especially compared to New York. So once I was able to break out of that initial bubble of like, what am I doing here? Um, I felt like it actually was quite a welcoming place to be. And I think it was, again, a unique point of or position to be in that a lot of other people that came to that global office were coming from international places. So there were
Right.
34 different nationalities in our office out of 75 people. So
Wow.
there were a lot of people in the same boat, and we actually, I'd say that's probably the closest I've been with my colleagues, where we really leaned on each other. We spent time with each other outside of work a lot. We would even walk home together sometimes. So there was a lot of community around that, which I think was lucky. But I did do things like join yoga studios. Didn't meet that many people there, but kind of felt like I had started to build routines in
Right.
Dublin that really made it feel like home. Um, Again, maybe a benefit of that country in particular. I think people are just very warm and welcoming. So that helped. But London was quite different. I actually expected London to feel more similar to New York, and it is in a lot of ways, but culturally it's very different. And I
Hmm.
think that's when I felt the biggest culture shock, actually. And I just remember my first few morning calls with the team in London. I was one of the only non-British people at that time. We've got a little more diversity in the team now, but I remember thinking I tend to sign on and say things like, "Happy Monday, everybody!" Like, really positive stuff, and probably be a little annoying. And then there was a day that I heard someone talking about like, oh, people that say happy Monday, like what are they on about? Da da da. And I think that was a bit of a learning curve. I was like, okay, my humor doesn't resonate here.
Yeah.
Like, how do I speak? How do I act as a human? I'm way too American and positive. And I think I've become a bit more cynical, but in a I don't know, not actually cynical, but the way I present myself maybe.
Yeah.
Um, so it took a lot of adapting here, I'd say.
Yeah.
I have done a lot of random kind of different things to try and meet people. Like, I know we spoke about it before, but Bumble BFF was one that felt quite bold. But they had a lovely new platform they launched where you could create meetup events or like a group around a very specific thing. And I started like a ladies who brunch vegan group, for example.
Right.
And I actually met a lot of lovely people that way. So it's been 3 years now, and I finally feel like I kind of have a home. But it did take a good 2 years to start feeling that, which was tough. I won't lie.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think as someone who's lived in 5 countries myself, I think one of the biggest things when you are going abroad and you're doing these experiences, just know it's gonna take some risks in the social department. And in America, we have a very fast friend culture, whereas in other places it's a little bit more of a slow burn. So having routines, going to the same place every week, going and being bold and starting a conversation, or finding the one extrovert who's making eye contact with you and jumping in on theirs is always really, really helpful. But aside from the friend thing, because I know that that also is really dependent on your dynamic at work, and if you have a lot of expats, I would recommend if you are going abroad, going into companies that have a lot of expats, guys, is helpful in terms of assimilating faster. But what about the design style? Like, were there clear differences between New York and Dublin and the UK? How has that impacted your work?
Yeah, totally. I mean, just to start from the very beginning, I remember in school, we actually had a whole class in the packaging program around British design. And I remember back then, I really rated it and thought it was such a cool, kind of different expression of packaging.
Mm,
They had all sorts of like, I think it's Terrell's potato chips or crisps here.
mm,
But they had all this like funny photography on the packs, and I was like, that would never happen in the States, but it would happen here because people like kind of cheeky, somewhat sinister and or cynical, kind of like smile in the mind kind of I guess,
Right.
design cues, which I really personally love. So I think it does bring a different flavor of how we talk about our brands here. But I guess in my current role, we are also taking care of 46 different markets around Europe. And that has been probably the most interesting and difficult,
Mhm.
but in a good way, part of the role, where what resonates in Germany would be so different than what resonates in Spain. And so it's kind of like
Right.
the idea of global design. Um, how do you keep global consistency and
Mhm.
keep your kind of core brand assets consistent and feel like they're coming from the same brand, but at the same time very locally relevant? And
Right.
I mean, I think that's the biggest, most fun challenge actually of the job is like you have to really start to understand the culture of who you're designing for. So luckily we do get to travel quite a bit with that. So recently I've been doing a lot of photo shoots and asset creation in Spain. And even just every time I go, I'm like, oh, this makes so much more sense now while why they're asking for X, Y, and Z in this brief.
Yeah.
Because see, how it resonates in the market. So that has definitely been a big learning curve, but also one of the reasons I think I would stay here is it never gets boring.
Mhm.
Um, in Dublin, I'd say it was very different because that was a global role. So in the global role, we would set the strategy for the brand at a global level and we didn't execute. So we just talked to the regions about how they would execute. So it was a different kind of task altogether, but we did have visibility to how China might interpret the Pepsi campaigns versus how Latin America would. So, again, interesting, but in a different way.
Yeah. And even how color theory can change that. So I want to pivot into new, like, emerging designs, things like that, and what they can be doing before they even start with companies. But before that, I did want to just mention, guys, if you are going abroad, if you are, even just in your local community, really great way to research a culture and a brand is through their media. Every brand, every design tells a story. So looking around at their packaging and what they already do, looking around at their music, the differentiations of the music that they have, videos, the way that they use linguistics are all great ways where you can start exposing yourself to that culture and it will allow you to assimilate a lot easier. I know I listened to a lot of German rap before I moved to Germany, and that definitely helped. Um, so, for young designers, what would you say are the hot tips that they could be doing in university, whether that's things that they can do outside of school or in school, or what they can be putting in their portfolio that will really make them stand out and that you as a hiring manager would like to see?
Mm, yeah. It's a good question, and I feel like I always answer it slightly differently, because things change literally on a day-to-day basis with what we're sometimes looking for, but there is one thing that never changes, which is passion and curiosity, and I think that that's obviously something that will come through probably the most in the way that you talk about your work, or
Mhm.
present yourself and your portfolio, but there are kind of strategic ways that you can do that and allow your portfolio to help you come across in a very curious and passionate way. I mean, I'll give an example of, I guess, the last time I crafted my portfolio, which was way too long ago at this point. I would be scared to do it again. But one thing that I did do was, I think I mentioned I have a big passion for photography and being on set and doing that side of the styling and creative direction, and kind of pre-production. And so in my portfolio, I made sure that every single project I had an element of photography that I had done myself within that. And I even had an image on my first page. I remember this very clearly because I missed my flight home from Paris when I was about, I don't know, 18, ran out of money, was stuck, went like crying on a walk by myself and went up to Sacré-Cœur, and there's a viewpoint of Paris, and I took this picture. And that was actually the front page of my portfolio, and it just said fearless, limitless. And maybe that's a really bold statement to have as my first page, but I just spoke about kind of it introed the photography aspect, but it also talked about kind of me as a person being really into travel and exploring new things and how that made me feel like I could tackle any challenge. So I think adding details that feel really personal to you in your portfolios or in your work is really helpful. Um, or even linking projects that feel linked to a passion that you have that's maybe not design oriented. Like if there's a sport that you love to play, you know, building a whole project around that, I think speaks
Yeah.
volumes and allows an interview or, you know, sharing your portfolio to feel a lot more like a personal conversation than just
Yeah.
here's my work. And I think the more you can get your own personality to shine through, that's really honestly like the base of what we would look for is like personality is a big thing because, you
Yeah.
know, design is such a human sort of job to have. And so that human element is so important.
Yeah, so to kind of break that down, so what I'm hearing from you, show curiosity and ingenuity, right? Have passion projects, that's always a good sign. And then, what are other tips about portfolios? The first one that comes to mind, for instance, is that should be like white background and like very clean. So what would be like two or three other tips for your portfolio that you sort of be like, okay, guys, like here's hot tips for portfolios.
Definitely. I think one thing is don't overdo it. I think there are times, even with myself, I remember going through the process, you might have 8 or 10 projects that you're like, "I can't pick. I want to show all of them because that shows range." But actually, I think trying to cut it down and keep it pretty concise to maybe 5 max is really helpful, and really spend time with each of those projects. And again, I feel like you can't be prescriptive saying what should go into each of those 5 projects. Like, you need to show a digital thing, you need to
Right.
show a merch thing. It's not necessarily that. Again, I think, just making sure that the content around each of your projects is well-rounded in some way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
So not just singular, like, "Here's a pack that I did," or, "Here's a poster that I did." It's kind of like, here's how that translates across various touch points. But those touch points should be catered to what you are interested in. You know, if you love, um, again, photography, or if you love, maybe you do like some of the digital stuff, like make sure that that really sings.
Right.
But again, kind of showing, making sure that every project has legs beyond just like one execution on a page. And then that way, again, it cuts, like you want to have a few pages for each one, but just not more than like 5 because it gets long.
Yeah.
Um,
And I would even go so far to say now with portfolios, the way is definitely websites, and you can for
yes.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So, with that, guys, we do have time for a few more questions. So if there is any other questions that you would like me to answer, if there's one that you feel like you want me to really hit, you can add an emoji to it in case I didn't get to it. It looks like we got to almost all the questions that are already there. Um, Interviews. Like you mentioned showing curiosity, you mentioned showing passion. So what are some hot tips for interviews if you had to like tip one, tip two, tip three for going into interview for design roles?
I think one point I'll probably hit on first, because sometimes you almost forget this point, but is that it's not all about the company or individual interviewing you, but you also interviewing them. And, you know, a good fit should go both ways. And I
Right.
think having coming prepared, and knowing maybe why you want to be at that company in particular is really critical. So if you come in and you're like, I'm so excited to talk to you because I saw that you guys did this project or this campaign or whatever it is, and it really resonated with me for these reasons. I think coming with those types of thoughts in your back pocket really, really just kind of shine through. It
Yeah.
shows that curiosity. It shows that you're engaged. And also shows that it's not just you being, I guess, desperate to take any job that you might be able to come across, but that, you know, you're also thinking about where you want to fit in, and apply yourself. So that would probably be the first biggest tip, really. Um,
And
I
a good
mean,
tip for cover letters too, right there as well, I would say. Yeah.
people always love to hear about themselves. So like do your research, stalk people. I've done it more and more. The more senior I've gotten, the better I've gotten at this. But um, you know, I find that sometimes you genuinely find something about someone that might not even be the point of what you're there to talk about, but you're like, "Oh my God, I just saw that you worked at this company in the past. Like, like you have to tell me about this before we even start this interview." Like that, those kinds of moments, I think are that A, speak volumes, but are also just like really good ways to connect. And then it kind of breaks the ice as well. Like,
Yeah.
um, another tip, this is again more like a psychology one, I guess, but um, repeating back certain things that people kind of say to you, like speaking the language. Um, Again, really paying attention to who you're speaking with and kind of it sounds weird, but like literally almost saying back some of the words that they might say to you. It shows that you're paying attention, you're listening, you're processing, and again, psychologically, people like that. People like to hear what they say back to them.
Sure.
But
For sure.
that's just more on the conversational level. And then again, I guess not trying to overshare maybe in the work sense,
Mm,
like really, really highlighting your top 3 to 5 things that you've done.
mhm,
But going into more depth of like why those projects mean something to you.
right. I also think it needs to be said too, guys, if you are interviewing, and I know for some people this might not be something you catch on, pay attention to what you're wearing. The amount of students who interview and they're wearing hoodies, and I have to leave a note when we get to the interview stage, like to make sure that we really go over this, like that, like business casual, right? Like, like not business casual, business, depending on the company you're applying for. Like I would check to see what people wear on their LinkedIn and stuff, but definitely going in, I mean, there's nothing wrong with a turtleneck and a nice pair of earrings, especially if you're or like a collar to button down short if you're a man, like that stuff really matters. And it does speak volumes to you if you're coming in polished, and coming into that job putting your best foot forward. So I always like to mention that. All right, so you know what what is some, so I got the question, is it better to have a strong resume, cover letter, or portfolio for internships? I think that answers all three. But I wanted to ask, in addition to that question, when you are looking at resumes, what do you consider to be a strong resume for a junior level, right? Someone coming in. Are there things that aren't graphic design related that you feel like are really relevant and should be on the resumes if they have it?
That's a good question. You know what's funny is that I feel like the way we've hired so far in PepsiCo has been very I guess, hands-on, and we've been attending big portfolio shows.
Mhm.
So, to be honest with you, I don't really read a lot of resumes. Like, that's
Mm.
not the first thing that I look at, but that's just my experience. I think we look first at the person and their book. And I will say that personally, I've hired mostly around the person almost more than anything else. Like the work, of course, is so important. Um, but for example, I think that I've tended to hire people that almost might not have the best executional skills, but show qualities in other ways throughout how they communicate about themselves. But I
Mhm.
guess if I were to be reading resumes, and especially if that's the first thing that I would see, um, I do think that, again, I'm not overly obsessive of like they need to have had 3 internships or X amount of experiences in the design industry. Because of course, if you're coming from school, you
Yeah,
may
yeah.
not have had that exposure. Um, so that being said, I think if there are other roles that you've done in your life or experiences or even volunteer things that might show a different side of your personality, then that's definitely worth including. So I mean, for me personally, I coach figure skating on the side, and that is something I still always keep on my resume because I'm like, you know what? That is a rogue skill, and I learned how to build an ice rink, and that doesn't speak to design, but that speaks to learning how to build something. So I still keep it on there, and that was something I did like back in school.
Yeah,
Um,
I still keep all of my volunteer, like especially like I, for instance, have my Gold Scout award. I keep that on there. I think if I had to give you guys some action steps, all work experience is good work experience when you're in university. Like if you're on your summer breaks and you don't have a job at all, like retail, restaurant, all of those things are great. Restaurant, I think is super good because you're going to learn a lot about client facing and that type of working, like even as when I was a designer, like that was so helpful for me in my role. But if you are going to work retail, can you already start working with the equipment? Can you work in print shops or copy shops where they're like Staples, right? Where they're printing out things so you know how things get printed. Can you see if you can be your clubs or your school's graphic designer? Like something to think about is like, how can I get the word graphic design on my resume? It doesn't always have to be a job, guys. It can be volunteering, it can be clubs, it can be doing stuff on freelance or for your mom and pop shop jobs, etc. But definitely the more you can get those things on there, and don't discount restaurants or retail or even working at McDonald's as not relevant experience because it will give you the soft skills needed. All right, I think we have time for one more question, or actually, I think we answered pretty much everything that. Oh no, there was one question. So, what were some of the struggles you had when climbing the corporate ladder? Or what advice can you give to people when climbing that ladder? And is there any last advice you want to leave us with?
Yeah, sure. I would say the biggest struggle slash learning curve was not being afraid to ask questions or be totally honest with not knowing something in a room. I think that I think a lot of people might err on the side of caution when asking questions in a meeting, or especially in a meeting with like others included or more senior people. You don't want to look like you don't know what you're talking about. But I found that sometimes when I've asked questions and just been like, you know what, I'm tired of not knowing what this acronym is. Just gonna ask it, there's always somebody else in that room that's like, "Thank you so much for asking because I had no idea either." And I think that was one of the biggest kind of learning curves of like just letting go of that fear of asking the questions,
Mhm.
being kind of vulnerable with people. And I was on a call today, for example, and we were talking about procurement, and I was like, I'm just going to be totally honest with you guys, and I hope you don't judge me for this, but I have no clue how the procurement team works and what we're talking about here. So, do you want to set up some time so maybe I can learn or have a session with them? How should I navigate this? And just being brutally honest and saying, maybe I should know this already, but I don't. So, can you help me?
Yeah.
Um, and I've had a couple people in my time as well drop calls into my diary, and I'm like, I don't know who this person is. And at one point, it was a person working in comms in Germany, but she had an interest in design, and she somehow found my contact and reached out, and we ended up doing 3 or 4 hour long sessions. And I walked her through all the work we're doing, gave her some insights, and now she's kind of like going down a path of how to pursue a role in design. And she was really bold and just finding anyone in the design center in PepsiCo and just dropping a call in. And
Yeah.
I found that surprisingly, people are kinder than you think and will often give you the time of day. So just kind of that's been a big kind of, I guess, critical piece of climbing that ladder has just been being really honest and vulnerable and not thinking that I always know the answer.
Yeah,
So
and that's just it, guys, it's asking for clarification, and don't be insecure about it, like, don't be like, I'm sorry, I don't." Instead, just be like, "Hey, listen, I wanna get clarification on this. Can you just confirm I wanna make sure I'm on the same understanding. Can you just confirm for me what that acronym means so I know I have it perfect in my notes and I can, you know, jump on that later? Because a lot of people will respect getting clarification, but definitely coming into it with like, I want to make sure that all of my I's are dotted and T's are crossed. Like, can you just go over what that means? I think that's such a great tip and thank you for sharing that. And yeah,
I was gonna say, just to build on that, I guess the second piece of it would be bringing people on the journey. And again, the more senior I've been as well, the more I've learned to do this. But sometimes people might reject an idea or not be on the same page with you just because they don't get where you're coming from. And this goes across like all aspects of life, really. But it's like if you just tell people where you're coming from and like how you're feeling about it, even if it's TMI or feels like TMI sometimes, it's like people tend to be a lot kinder, as I said before, than you think. And I think that's just such a big piece of advice that I got recently in a leadership training. And it was all about bringing people on the journey and the power of doing that.
yeah.
And it's really true. So
Yeah, within and also within reason too, as well, of like making sure to balance that, but especially when it's work related and it's the design thinking, being like, hey, I'm inspired by this. This is what's making me think this is the direction we should go in. I'm happy to have people piggyback and we discuss it, but so this is where the inspiration's coming from. I think it's such a powerful linguistical tool. All right. Well, guys, you asked such amazing questions today. We are at time. Thank you so much, Haley, for giving this time today and dedicating to this. And if you guys have any questions, again, I put it in the chat. I will put it once more. We have a info session about the whole program on the 21st at 5 p.m. Eastern. I will be leading that, so you'll be seeing me again. And you can ask me any question you have about ArtBound. But thank you again, Haley, so much for joining. I'm going to stick around with you for just 1 second. And yeah, guys, thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you guys, and thanks for all the great questions. It's really
Such good
nice.
questions today. Bye, everyone.